Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
How's everything going? Are you in New York right now?
Yeah, yeah, everything's going fine. It's actually starting to get warm and um things are starting to open back up and stuff. It's a slow process, and it's definitely I came back here after being in Tel Aviv for a year, so
Oh,
um it's not as relaxed, but it is what it is, so it's fine.
well, I kind of wanted to start maybe hearing about how you grew up with music and what initially inspired you, and maybe if you could just give us a little history of how you got into guitar and into jazz in the first place.
Yeah, sure. Jazz took a while. I only got into jazz like when I was 15, but I um, I didn't have that many musicians around me growing up. But I was always like, whenever I was exposed to music, I was kind of drawn to it. Um, but music was appreciated at home, but nobody was a musician really. So, but there was a excuse me, a guitar kind of laying around. There's an organ upstairs. There's the instruments, but not much instruction until I was 6. And then I started to get some piano lessons. I can't remember if I asked for it or if my parents just said that would be a good thing for you to do. I honestly don't remember. Um, I think when I really got like the bug was when I first when I first watched that movie Moonwalker by Michael Jackson.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's my first memory of like seeing music, and I think I was 7 or something, and that was my first maybe memory of seeing like music and feeling like that, like, whoa, that's really powerful. I want to That's all I want to do forever. So um yeah, and well, at first I wanted to be a singer. My friends made fun of me for not singing nicely, so I wanted. Then I moved on to trying the drums, and then my neighbors was not happy with that, so I ended up playing the guitar. And I had a lot of guitar player neighbors, and they were all like fast playing rock players. So like I had a lot of shredding in the neighborhood, and I had people that I could go to and kind of they would show me stuff, or just play and kind of play stuff that would inspire me to go practice. Um, yeah, and then like the transition to jazz was starting when I got into like, let's say, more advanced rock. Like I mean, sorry, I'll take these back. More advanced rock, like Steve Vai and Joseph Triani and stuff. Um, uh, and then a little bit of diffusion, like Marcus Miller. I remember I got into that. And then I went to high school, and they accepted me even though I wasn't a jazz player, but it was a full-on jazz program. Um, and yeah, that's when I really kind of started knowing anything about jazz. I didn't know like who Miles Davis was before I went there. So like I remember first jazz history class, that name was thrown around, and I was like, that doesn't sound familiar. So I had like a ton of learning to do. I still do, in fact. But yeah, that was the beginning of that process. Started getting into jazz. Then I got really into like Northern Indian classical music when I was like in when I was 16 or 17. And then I studied with the sarod player who lived in Israel. Sarod is this beautiful Indian classical music instrument that is like basically like almost like a combination between a banjo and a sitar. It's like it's fretless, but it has like a skin here. So, but I studied music with him. I didn't study that instrument. So he would teach me raga and tala, and we would just play and hang out for a long time. And the kind of old-fashioned way of like, hey, yeah, come down Monday, and then we spend like 5 hours together just playing and then listening to music, eating some food, like
Mhm.
that kind of vibe. And while I was going deep into like, I mean, deep, as deep as you can get into that in 2 years, it's an infinity it's a whole thing by itself, which I hardly scratched the surface, but I was really invested in it. And then while I was very invested in that, I also really started getting invested in hard bop. And yeah, I was just like checking out a lot of Wes Montgomery, checking out like Coltrane, Miles, like all the greats, you know, Charles Mingus and Horace Silver, Bobby Timmons, Art Blakey, you know, Dexter Gordon, etc. And yeah, then I got really obsessive. Like I was started like learning all these tunes and transcribing solos and practicing hours a day, trying to play some gigs, writing music too, which was always a part of my process. Yeah, and then I was 18. I finished high school, maybe when I was 19, I guess. I don't remember if it was 18 or 19. Anyway, and then I didn't serve in the army. I went to New York for a little trip. Um, and then I was there for 2.5 months, or 2 months, sorry, and then a little bit in Canada. And I knew for sure that I wanted to go back there. So then I went back to Israel, and I basically spent the next kind of 2.5 years trying to find ways to go back there and live there permanently, or here, I guess, permanently. And yeah, and I've been there. I've been here ever since. 16 and a half years minus the previous year.
Cool. That was like made me think of so many questions, but one of them, last week we had a little class about like applying Indian music theory to jazz.
Oh, cool. Oh,
I
awesome.
was like fortunate enough to take like just 2 quarters in college of Kathak dance. And
oh, nice. Man, I love that stuff.
When I was in that class, I was always thinking about how I felt like every jazz major should be in that class, because I felt like it was so applicable to what we do as improvisers and as time.
What was the class like? Like what do you guys do?
Oh, well, we learned all about like what you were saying, like tal and like different like rhythmic recitation and a bunch of different elements of North Indian music, and
awesome.
Being able to sing everything. And I was wondering like if you could talk about maybe how that experience has influenced you as an improviser and just overall musician, if there's still elements of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's harder to like pinpoint what like the exact things, but I do know about myself. One thing is that like rhythm has always been something that I've been fascinated with. So even before I got into jazz, I was pretty obsessive about rhythm, and like some of my strongest memories are like moments of understanding certain rhythmic stuff. So like Northern Indian classical music was like an extension of that, because like just learning like T highs and kind of reciting like longer form rhythmic phrases that get resolved and stuff like that was really helpful. And I still love his music, but I was a kind of a fanatic John McLaughlin fan at some point when I was growing up. So yeah, when I just studying that kind of language, like all of a sudden learning at 29 or learning stuff in 5, that stuff was it's still with me today when I play jazz. I mean, and of course there's other elements of that music that are beneficial to any musician, like the phrasing and the sensitivity to how you build a phrase and how you land a phrase. That stuff is deep. So yeah, it's hard to say like, oh, this I got from Indian classical music, but I'm sure it's at this point it's like it has changed my musical DNA. I was exposed to that radiation for so long.
Totally, yeah. Another thing you mentioned was about how composition is an important part of your life and your musical practice. And I would love to hear about maybe how you approach composition, if there's like a certain formula like you might start with all the time, or how you usually trying to write something.
Every song is kind of different, but I basically try to write something that I would like to hear. So and that's the bottom line. So like even after I have an idea, like I'll play it a million times until I feel like it's enjoyable to listen to,
Mhm.
for me. And my guess is that if I really like it, then somebody else might like it too. That's kind of what I'm basing this on. So, but honestly, like when like the first day, I think that I got a guitar, I already like wrote a tune, and I remember like recording it, and I have a cassette somewhere in my parents' place. But like as soon as I had an instrument in my hand, I was like, okay, let me try to figure something out. And then I called my friend who was a well, he wasn't a drummer actually, he was just a kid. But I bought an electric, like a small like pad set, and I was like, he was like, man, I don't play drums. It's like, yeah, just check it out. And I just showed him, like, just play this and that. So, um, like, yeah, that was like my first days of playing guitar. So it just kind of stayed like that, I just honestly, I think it's the most satisfying thing for me. Like when I write a tune that I think is good, like that's the best feeling. And now during this pandemic, I have all this time to spend in front of a computer, like composing stuff. And it's I almost like it too much. Like I can go into a wormhole and like just it's 5 hours later. I'm like, wow, it's 2 a.m. and tomorrow I have to wake up to take the kid to school at like 7:15. And but it just I'm having so much fun with, like, even now I'm also kind of trying to produce a little bit. So that stuff is the most satisfying to me. Like in some ways, I feel like maybe the fact that I'm a jazz player is almost a mistake. It's almost like it's almost like something that happened because I went to that high school and they were like, "Oh, you're supposed to play over Stella by Starlight and over these tunes." But in some ways, I feel like I was actually supposed to be a songwriter. Like that's what I enjoy. Like probably more than like it's also yeah probably more than playing jazz. Although I love playing jazz, but yeah, I don't know what something about like having a song that you think is pretty is like, wow, that wasn't there before and now it's here, and it's all because I sat in front of a page or with a guitar for a while, and now it's a part of my life. Like that song is like it feels more significant than a solo or like a show or a gig. Now this song is like a part of my life story, and I can play it again. Like somebody else can play it, and it might be a part of somebody else's life, which is a crazy thought to me. Like that, like some of my songs, people say, man, that song's like helped me through rough times. Blah, blah. It's like, wow, really? I was just having a good time. So I really get a kick out of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I like composing most of music too, and I totally relate. And I think like having the skills and the knowledge of jazz can only help and inform like what you're able to write, because it gives you maybe a wider palette than you might
Oh,
otherwise.
for sure. I mean, jazz is like, I mean, when you really get into it, you get so many skills that maybe your ego can make you lose, like, or not use for the good. Like you get. I mean, when you get this understanding of harmony, which like most rock musicians don't have, or you get understanding of rhythm that most rock musicians don't have, but most jazz people don't have a sense of like what's a beautiful song. They studied too hard, like all the mechanics, and then the mechanics becomes the art form. But to me, that doesn't do much. Like when I listen to cats who shred, like it can be the most sophisticated harmonic stuff, but if he doesn't do that thing that Michael Jackson did to me when I first listened to him, or or Ray Charles, or Betty Carter, or whoever, the Beatles, whoever it is, then I don't know, it's cool, like it's impressive. My brain is like, oh, this is fun, but like the rest of my body is like, okay, let's
Yeah.
look at Twitter.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, one thing I did want to ask you about was like when you play in bassless settings, like in those bassless trios, if you could speak to maybe how your role changes and maybe how the responsibilities shift and how you have to conceptualize that setting as a group to make it work?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's still to this day, one of the hardest things to do, like after like when we do a tour with Real Feels and then I go and do like a trio with a bass player, I'm like, wow, this is so easy. Like, because, I know that I don't need to, and a part of what I need to work on is reminding myself that, but I don't need to constantly be the entire orchestra with
Right.
the drummer and the horn. Like I can just be like a violin, or I can be like I can be one voice, and this is something that I kind of have to keep reminding myself when I play in those kind of situations without bass. Like it's okay actually to leave that space because that's why we're doing it. I mean, sure, we're saving money on a bass player, but that's not why we're doing it. So um yeah, basically, like sometimes what I find myself doing in those situations is like being a bass player and a piano player and a guitar player, and that those are, that's an impossible task. Um, Sometimes it's appropriate, and then sometimes I'll just play the bass. I'll just play chords. I'll leave some space in the low frequency, or maybe I'll try to think about it more orchestrally. So the guitar is a pretty limited instrument. Like it's not like piano or a keyboard.
Mhm.
So I'll I'll try to think. Okay, what am I mean? This is true for any situation, but especially in such a bare naked situation. Like, okay, what am I craving in the music? What's gonna make it hip now? What's gonna make it fun now? What is missing? So but that's actually what I think in any situation. So anyway, for bassless trios, I think just the fact that I have to play bass and play the rest of the stuff that I'm supposed to play makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, I get stressed out when I have to play like without a bass player, and I have a piano, so like I shouldn't be so stressed out. But I,
Yeah, well,
it's like
it's
a different.
hard.
You have to reframe what music is supposed to sound like, or what I've
Mhm.
been like conditioned that jazz is supposed to sound like. I guess I
Mhm.
don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean that's a big part of why I enjoy doing those kind of bands is because it's you have two options. It's either you try to make it sound like a regular jazz band, or you use that discomfort to create something that's different, something that you're uncomfortable with, and that discomfort is a good thing. I think that um, it teaches you new options that if you just played another gig with a bass player or in a regular situation you wouldn't have. So
Mhm.
anyway, that's
I
that.
re- I remember my question from earlier. I was gonna
Oh
ask
yeah,
if you ever write on different instruments and what that process looks like.
yeah. A little bit on piano sometimes. I mostly like, at least the initial ideas, they usually come away from the instrument. So like I'll have like a melody or a certain vibe that I want to go, and then I'll start like humming a melody. Usually it's terrible, or at least sounds terrible. But in my head, I know what I'm thinking about, and then I try to figure it out on the guitar. But yeah, I write a little bit on piano, and mostly either with the guitar or like with no instrument
Mhm.
or on the guitar.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um, has the you mentioned how you've had a ton of time during the pandemic to, write and really get into it. Have you been like actively working on any new projects that are gonna emerge post COVID? Or I know Trio Grand was a thing. Can
Grande, yeah.
hear
Uh-huh.
about that, how that came about and
Trio Grande was before. Trio Grande, we recorded that before COVID.
oh,
Yeah. So the reason why I was away from New York for so long is because I was actually just planning to be away from New York for 6 months.
mhm.
Um, and then at the very end of that, COVID started. So that's, we were in Israel and we're like, should we go back to New York? Or, all my gigs are canceled. There's nothing to go back to. What should we do? So let's see. Here there's beach, grandparents, and amazing food. And in New York, no gigs. People are afraid to hang out, and so it was a kind of an easy choice
Mhm.
Um, but before that, right before that, we recorded. We went on a trip, kind of not around the world, but like we wanted to explore some of the world. So we went to Thailand and Vietnam first, and spent 3 months there, and then we flew back to Israel and we supposed to stay for another month, and we ended up staying more. So before that, we recorded Rio Grande. But yeah, during the pandemic, I've been like at first it took a second. I was like, okay, I'm like exploring a little bit more the option of production, like trying to do stuff in the computer. And at first it was like, oh, this is interesting, this is fun, this sounds pretty good. And then I would get better at it, and I'm like, oh, that sounded terrible, but now it sounds good. And now I'm like, oh, that sounded terrible. Now it sounds better, but now I also know that I constantly think that it sounds good when it actually sounds terrible. So I that's a big lesson for me. And now I'm careful, and I'm also asking people, hey, is this terrible, or like what would we change stuff? But yeah, I have like, so I wrote all these tunes, and now I produced most of them, or at least to a certain degree, I produced all of them into tracks, and I overdubbed some people on them, um, and it's kind of coming together. I also have like projects that I recorded before COVID that I need to release.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I have like a trio with Becca Stevens and Antonio Sanchez doing standards, and that's like already mastered for over a year now. But it's just something about the my mood. I mean, I think it would be lame to blame the pandemic for the fact that I hate anything that has to do with business. So um like I'm sitting on those records, and I just have zero ambition to send anybody an email saying like, hey, I have a record, you should release it, or anything like that. So that's why those records are just on my hard drive. But I have that, and I have so if any of you want to do it for me, send me an email. No, but I have a live record with Super Octave, the band with Aaron Parks and Kendrick Scott. We did an LP for Nouvelle, which is a label that does only LPs. But after 2 years of the release, you get to actually release it digitally, and I also have some extra tracks that weren't on the original LP. And yeah, I mean that band sounded great, I thought. So it would be a shame not to release it, and now I can, so I should.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Um,
want to see the tours of those projects too once
yeah,
that's
right, exactly, yeah, yeah, and also like the record has like the band before it was a band, and then like the drummer changed, and like we were touring a bunch, and then those shows were like kind of a nice documentation of where we got to as a band. So um, yeah.
One big question I always like to ask, since CCJA is a youth jazz organization, um, I guess there's a lot of different facets to this question, but as someone with such a distinctive musical voice, like both as a composer and as a improviser and musician, do you have advice for like the young jazz musician about how to develop their voice and kind of find their way, and maybe when you have setbacks, like how you overcome those?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I know the answer, but from my own experience, and like just from studying other musicians that I know, and other artists that I know, um, basically, well, I'll start with an example. When I went to the Van Gogh Museum, I was walking around seeing the beautiful pieces, and then there was a whole section of him copying Japanese art, like basically transcribing Japanese art. Now, did anybody say, "Yo, Van Gogh, get your own sound"? No. So he went through the process of like studying somebody else to become who he become. So and then you read, if you read interviews with the greats, many times they'll say like how they wore out the records of the people that came before them, and like they really, or they would go and apprentice with some of them. So all this to say that, like, I think um, a big part of finding your own sound is through other people's sound. And I think that the important part for you as a musician is to curate what that influence is. Like, you know, um, don't transcribe something because like somebody told you you should, but transcribe something because it moves you. You know, it like you listen to it and you say like, wow, this is amazing, and this has something that I want to have in my own playing. I think that feeling is a sign that that thing is already a part of your sound. Like there's an element in there
Mhm.
that matches your DNA, and but you have to look for that feeling before you go and study another musician. And then once you find it, like don't be shy to like just go all the way in. Like and I'll give you another example. Mark Turner. I talked to him about this, and you know we did a lot of clinics around the world, and like he will get that question or variation on that. And um, he one time he said he talked about how like he went through phases where he tried to sound exactly like Warren Marsh, and then another phase where he started try to sound exactly like John Coltrane, another phase where he started trying to sound like Joe Henderson. Um, and you know nowadays, like you hear Mark Turner. I mean, even 20 years ago, you hear Mark Turner, it's like this Mark Turner, like boom, like you know, unless it's somebody who's copying them, and you know, but basically, like you know that sound, so individual. Yet, you know, there, you know, he's shamelessly admitting, like, yeah, I was just trying to sound like other people. But I think you can't escape who you are. Like your sound is, you know, it's there. You all you're doing is like kind of you almost like using the spirits or using the like your ancestors to show you the way of how to find it. So to me, like transcription and studying people's music is the more I think about it, I really think that it's a spiritual process. You're putting yourself as a part of a lineage. You're trying to feel, even get a glimpse of what it is to be in somebody else's shoes, playing this music. And yeah, that's my biggest advice. And look for that feeling, like you know, in everything you do, musically or not musically. Look for that feeling of like, yeah, this feels right. Like, this feels. I'm listening to this. I'm transcribing this, or I'm practicing this, and it feels like the right thing to do. Like look for that. Don't do it because like, oh, my teacher told me. And I mean, I guess it's good to listen to teachers, but sorry, this is school. I shouldn't say this, but uh, like do what your teacher told you, and then with the rest of your time, which is still usually a long time, spend it chasing like things that like you're really curious about. Okay, it would be nice to play, you know, all 12 keys, major scale in this that pattern, but what would feel really nice? Like maybe if you learn that song that you always wanted to learn, or maybe if you transcribe a solo by an artist you really admire, or maybe if you write something, or maybe if you sit down and just, you know, think about something, or write poetry, you know, do something that like feels like get those artistic juices moving. It's not, you're not working in a chicken cutting factory, you're not like stamping a card and like and then stamping it again at the end of the day. You're doing something that's supposed to be like inspiring. So that's my advice. Like look for that feeling, and it's not easy. I'm not saying I haven't sat here in this room doing something up and down the scale and like, checking, okay, 12 keys, cool. Yeah, I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but essentially, even in that, you should look for that spark of like, oh, this is, I'm in this, like this is doing something. So anyway, that's the
Yeah.
answer.
I like what you kind of talked about with the ancestry of the music you love. There's like this lineage that like I feel that way sometimes when I hear something, and I've never really put words to it, but it's like I feel like we're, even though I'll never meet that person, but I'm listening to their music and we come from this same kind of zone that just connects. It's a cool thing to think about.
Yeah, and when you study somebody, you really earn that feeling. Like you really like, you know, um, you really spent the time to put yourself in their shoes and to kind of experience their musical world. So that's kind of taking it to a further step.
Mm-hmm. There's a cool question Thomas just sent me. Thomas, do you want to ask it? Great.
Yeah, I could ask it. First off, thanks for being here. This is so awesome.
Oh man, my pleasure. Thank you for being here.
So the question, I had a question about rhythm and about pulse. I've been thinking about pulse a lot recently, and specifically the moments I've been seeking out, those moments where like you lose the relationship between what you're playing and the pulse, and your sense of where you are falls apart. And I was there's a couple of moments on Ari's album NY Standard, specifically Boplicity, that first track. You play phrases of the melody where like I hear those phrases in one place rhythmically over and over and over, and you set them somewhere else, and it just like tosses me overboard so regularly. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts about like how you developed that comfort with a melody, some phrase that you've heard in one place so many times, and getting comfortable with that being in another spot.
Yeah, it's a great question. So you remember like earlier I was saying like how like some of my strongest memories are like rhythm memories. So like one of them is like being in a van. We were playing on a TV show when I was a kid. I was a part of a band on a TV show in Israel, and like all the other musicians were older than me. So one of them was showing me that Fate No More did a cover of that song. No, it sounds funny, but I just can't stand the pain. And then it goes and that was like, whoa. At that moment I was like, damn, you can put that strong beat in a different place, and it's killing, it's confusing me, and I'm feeling things that are uncomfortable in a good way. So that was one of those moments, and that's basically like a very simple example of displacement, rhythmic displacement. So and then the drummer in that band was he is still a really good drummer actually. Do you guys know Nir Z? Nir Z is like his brother actually. So Nir Z played with Genesis after Phil Collins left, and great production drummer. But his brother Tomer is also a great drummer, and he lives in Israel. And he was like maybe 3 years older than me, which when you're 9 or 10, that's like significant. Like he's like basically like your older brother. So he would do like stuff like like stuff like that all of a sudden would feel weird like that. So displacement was like kind of something that was taught to me early on, like I was 10 or something. And I was upset. I've been obsessed about it ever since. What I would say is like start with simple things. Like my go-to example is Mary Had a Little Lamb. Like if you can take that and move it around, that's a very straight example. There's no syncopation at melody. So like if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, that's on 1. But if you go 3, so that was 2 and 3, 1, 2, 3, so and sometimes I'll play like a backbeat, like then 8 notes, so sorry, that's 16 notes. And then 16 notes, etc. So that's the simple melody. As soon as you start introducing syncopation, things get really messed up, because everything that was on the beat becomes off the beat, and everything, unless you're doing by quarter notes. So I just spent a lot of time like kind of taking some harder and harder melodies, and seeing if I can feel them in different places. But the thing that happens, and this just needs practice, is that you start believing yourself. You believe the melody, you believe the new place of the melody. You think, oh, that's that, because your brain is, like you said, like it's so used to hearing that melody in one place that you kind of follow it, which is totally normal. And by the way, still happens to me if I go really far sometimes, especially with Ari, because Ari would like just, oh, you put it there, great, and then he'll do that, and he's stronger with that stuff than me. So like then it's like, okay, I'm gonna wait for you to give me one now because I have no idea where we are. So slowly increase the amount of syncopation. So that another go-to that I have is like C jam blues. You know that one? Like one,
Yeah.
2, 3. So that one is pretty straightforward, but that last note is a syncopation. So that's when it becomes tricky. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That was wrong. That's still on because we're just doing quarter notes. But now if I do 8 notes, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. No. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Yeah, that's it. And that's only if I'm considering the 8 notes, the actual unit, meaning with swing, you can consider it 2 triplets and 1 triplet, like 2 8-note triplets and one, taka. So if I'm doing that, then displacement can become even crazier, which I don't know if I can demonstrate it with the displacements right now, because I'll try to be clearer. So like if you take an 8-note in like swing, I mean, people feel in different places, but in a very generic way, it would be a quarter note triplet and an 8-note triplet. So becomes okay.
Right.
So right now I just moved 8-note. So like the long one became short and the short one became long. But if I wanted to move it verbatim, just triplet wise, then it would be a whole other thing. So, if you take 2, 3, 4, so it becomes da da. No, I'm gonna mess this up. Let me try. So it's like 2 triplet, 1 triplet, da da, right, ta. So.
Yeah.
One. So instead of that, we're doing da 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 da. No, the last one was wrong, but before that I was right. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll have to get back to you on that one, but you get the idea, right? Like you can do different levels of displacement like that. And the more rhythmic the melody is, the harder it's going to be. Like if you take like a bebop tune, like Confirmation or something, that starts to become really tricky. But do it slowly. Like make sure you feel it in a new place. And the backbeat thing really helps. Like if you're doing like a really straight melody like that, the backbeat, because that really gives you the feeling of 4/4, because we're so used to that beat.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's fantastic advice.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for the question.
We had another question in the chat. Asking what musicians outside of the jazz realm would you have interest in collaborating with or enjoy listening to these days?
Wow. I was just checking out some more Blake Mills. Some of his older stuff actually. I kind of forgot about him, and then he released those new tracks, and I was like, let me go back and listen to those old ones. And that record Hey Ho is incredible, I think. But yeah, speaking of him, like Tino Palladino would be somebody who I would love to play with one day. Man, I would love to play with Stevie Wonder. This is like if this was Christmas morning or Hanukkah morning and I could ask for anything I wanted. Who else? There's, so many. I mean, it's some of them even like don't have to be famous. Like I mean, this band Claire and the Reasons. I know all their songs and let's play with them. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of just people who are not extremely famous, but like that. I think could be a good match. Alan Hampton. I love his songs and his singing. But in jazz, Joe Lovano, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock. Um, Man, Roy Haynes is still around. I want to play with him. I'm not gonna play with him, but I can dream. Yeah, I'm forgetting a million people that I want to play with. I want to play with a lot of people. I actually made a list at some point. People that I really want to play with, and then did nothing about it. but I have a list.
I'll jump in.
Sure.
Gilad, maybe you could talk a little bit about, I mean, one thing I always tell people when I play with you is I don't ever really think of you as a guitar player, and we've talked a lot about how a lot of your main influences are people that don't necessarily play guitar,
Right.
like how piano players have been really influential on you, and other instruments. And maybe you could talk a little bit to that, just conversations that we've had about that, and sort of your approach to like your comping and things like that, where that sort of came from.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so like you said, like a lot of my influences are other instruments, piano players and saxophone players and singers, drummers. And in fact, at some point, I was kind of anti-guitar. One thing that I had to teach myself again is how to play the guitar, like how to play like a guitar player, because sometimes I feel like people wanted me to play guitar stuff, and I would sound like weird. So I kind of had to get back to my roots, which I used to play rock when I was growing up. So, but yeah, I think that's something that really helped me grow as a musician. It's like not being stuck to especially with an instrument like guitar, people can really get stuck on like this very closed, small world of like jazz guitar, and it's like I think it's so limiting, especially in this music. I mean, if you're saying rock, okay, like rock has guitar is that's the thing. But in jazz, I mean, who did the biggest revolutions in this music? Not guitar players. Like maybe Pat Metheny did it. He's probably like the biggest revolutionary on the instrument, like that plays guitar that changed the music. But in terms of, I'm not saying I love him more than other guitar players. I'm just saying like this is before and after Pat Metheny kind of thing. But like I mean, Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane, Kenny Clark, Roy Haynes, like people that actually changed the way the music is mostly not guitar players, and harmony, like Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young. Those people changed Satchmo. I mean, the list goes on, but I love Sco, I love Wes, I love Grant Green, I love all of them, but like the trajectory of the music changed mostly thanks to other instruments, other instrumentalists, and I don't want to limit myself to an instrument that in some ways is less developed than others in this genre. So that was always something that it really helped me expand like what I could do in the instrument. I feel like the guitar, if you just deal with guitar players all the time, you just end up playing guitaristic stuff, and that was too limited for me. Not as strong memories like my friend Eran Hareven, who's a great guitar player. You guys check him out. He's like, we went to high school together, and like we were doing this trip to Berkeley, actually, like with the big band. We had a big band, and we went to Boston, to Berkeley for like a week. And we were just like we shared rooms, like different people, and like he would just sit out in the hallway, kind of hang out and play the guitar. And like, man, check this out. Like McCoy, like he does this thing where like he plays fourths on the bottom, and then he'll play like some phrases on top, and then he like move it half step, and he kind of follows the phrase and stuff. It's like, interesting. You're dealing with somebody who's not a guitar player, like that, and it sounds really dope. And that was like a moment. So, you know, I think it's kind of a bummer to be stuck in this guitar land. Like there's so much music, so much, so many revolutionaries on other instruments.
Is there anybody right now that you're listening to that? I guess we just asked that, but yeah, never mind.
Like guitar players or other instruments?
Otherwise, yeah, guitar or otherwise that you have really been studying, like.
That's a good question. Honestly, no. I mean, there's people who inspire me recently more. Like, I think like on guitar specifically, I always had like, I always loved like, Kurt and Peter Bernstein and but recently getting a little bit more into like Mike Moreno and like and Julian Lage and like there's some great guitar players out there right now. I mean, it's a really good time for guitar, I think. So yeah, and then another instruments. I mean, I've been so deep, like when any free second that I have, I either practice. Like I'm also a family man, so like any time that I'm not dealing with that, I'm basically like working on my production stuff. So like I've been like kind of not checking out enough music, but the Blake Mills stuff was. I realized the other day that I had to use more references. Like I have to, when I work on production, like it would be nice to just cleanse my palette with like a good sounding track. So that Blake Mills record is just. I think it sounds amazing. Like the sound in it is so beautiful. I should probably listen to more music. I get so sucked into this production stuff that I forget to listen to music, honestly. So that's been my deal.
So like a huge thing that I think about a lot is like shed routine, right? Like just sitting in the shed alone.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've been discovering recently, obviously, is there's like a lot more to it, right? Like you have the hang, like so you can actually get gigs, right? You got to like check out the music. What do you think has been most influential for you outside of like sitting in a room that's gotten you to where you are? You know, like in terms of your playing, like stuff that isn't like, yeah, I practice this. Like I know you talked about checking out people and stuff, but like obviously getting into the New York scene, like that's rough, right? Like there's a lot of, like you even named them, there's a bunch of guitar players. Like what did you do to make it, you know, besides sit in a room and shed?
That's a good question. I mean, I I think that the sitting in a room and chatting part was extremely detrimental for the fact that I made it. Like you know, I think that specifically in New York, like you don't want to show up and not be happening. Like you can always get better, which I definitely hope I did. But like when I came here, I was already dealing. I was already kind of like it wasn't. I this. I mean this is the discussion about first impression lasts. So like I think it's better if it's not ready, like make it ready before you come here. Now you might say, but wait, how do I know it's ready? And what if like I keep feeling like it's not ready, but it's like people tell me it's ready. Well, read the room. That is my advice. Like if people call you to do gigs and like and people tell you they love your music and like you know you get some jazz woos during your solos, then it's probably a good chance you're pretty good. I didn't move here to New York thinking I'm the shit. Like just wait. New York is waiting for me. Like it wasn't like that. But I already played some restaurant gigs. People came to my gigs. Like I got called to play with other people's bands. So I was like, okay, I'm probably not terrible. I'll go to New York, and I definitely did my homework. Spent a lot of time in the shed, trying to study tunes, and every time somebody would call to it, I would put it on a list and learn it. And I was very serious about that. I still am, honestly. So the hang is important and stuff, but I feel like at the end of it, if you can't play, then it doesn't matter if you hang. If it's really fun to hang with you, like if you know, you gotta be able to play. That's the bottom line. Now there's a fine tuning of that. So like if you can play amazing, but you're not so pleasant to be around, or not professional, or all that stuff, and there's another guy who plays really really good, but not incredible, mind blowing, but really really good, and learns the music for the gig, and you know maybe they'll get the gig before you. So that's for sure relevant, and like and the other guy is a better hang, and you know you get into as a band leader, you know sometimes you work with sidemen and like you get into a friendship thing, like you get into some deep conversations, or you know they help you through a rough time, etc. So like that becomes real, you know that becomes like a friendship and a connection that is beyond the music. But you know again, to even get to any of those situations, you just have to play really really well. And it's like that happens from practicing, for me at least. I mean, some people are more natural than me, but like I think I'm kind of slow. So you know, practicing a lot and thoughtfully, like practicing with the intention of becoming better, not just again, not stamping the card at the not what do you call it, to the clock or whatever, uh, punching the clock, but like actually being thoughtful about it, saying, okay, what do I want to get better at? What do I suck at? What do I hear other people do that I wish I could do? Being thoughtful about it, you know. So that's my answer. It's mostly like for me at least, it was mostly practice room. You know I'm a low you know I can be an introvert. I mean I can also hang, but I definitely like my time alone in a room, just dealing with music, dealing with thinking about things, and moving ideas around, trying this, trying that, putting the guitar away, taking a break. You know, I like that stuff. Like probably more than I should. You know, maybe I'm not the person to ask, because I've never been a crazy hanger. You know, I mean, ask Colin. I mean, I like to go to bed early and wake up fresh and practice, and so
Unless I force you to stay up or
you do
something.
yeah, exactly. No, I mean sometimes I'll hang. You know, I'm not a complete what do you say, square. But I think to say square just gives away how much of a square I am. But I'm not, like, you know, I enjoy the hang. It's just that I also enjoy my own experimenting time, which is limited unless I make sure it's not.
That's all really good advice. Is there anyone else who has anything?
I've been struggling with hollow body guitar, and in the sense to play expressively. Sometimes I feel like the sound is getting lost in the mix, or in the sound of an overall band.
Right. Yeah, especially if it's a loud band. Yeah.
Yeah, like if I'm playing alone, it can be a dream sound.
Yeah,
but
yeah, totally.
On the stage with the band, it just disappears. And as you're playing familiar guitars, how you've been dealing with this situation?
I mean, you gotta pick the right guitar for the gig too. But you know, back when I used to play the Howard Roberts, that's a whole lot of guitar too. I remember I had to kind of like EQ in a pretty harsh way, actually. I remember I had an EQ pedal, and I remember setting it sometimes on a very extreme setting. Like I would cut a ton of low end, and like just to kind of, like you say, pierce through the band. Sometimes use the overdrive and stuff. But you know, then like if you play like the Mofa that I have now, like it pierces through like immediately. So you know, it has that. But then if you're trying to play like a really intimate, like kind of like you can hear the strings hitting the fretboard kind of vibe. I mean, it does it to an extent, probably because it's such a great guitar. It actually has more of that than most guitars that size. But still, today I was just playing the Howard Roberts all day and like acoustically, you know, and it's like, wow, that's such a nice sound, like such a good feeling to also produce all the sound from the instrument itself and not through an amp and stuff. So it's and then there's touch, you know, every guitar has a threshold of when it's starting to sound like it's played too hard. So you kind of have to find that sweet spot and ride it, and it's tough sometimes, especially because the instruments changes from day to day. When you know, like the action and stuff, they constantly move. So I guess another advice for you is like learn how to set up your guitar, because it's actually easier than you think. Most guitar players are kind of shy of like adjusting the bridge or adjusting the truss rod, but it's really no rocket science. It's like one direction goes up, one direction goes down, and the same on the bridge. Like people are just so afraid of it. I'm like, yo, that changed my life, you know, because then sometimes I would arrive to a gig and like the guitar would just not play, and you know, there's nothing you can do. What are you gonna do? Find a tech, you know, go to a guitar store, and it's so simple. You just carry like two little tools and change it, you know, boom. So that makes a big difference too. Mid-range is like really important. Like if you can get an EQ pedal and really study how to EQ mid-range, makes a big difference, because you know the higher mids are the frequencies that we can hear the most humans. Like if you're trying to really hear sound, like make a sound pierce through, like 1 to 1.5K, that's like talking. That's like your brain conceives that as like somebody trying to talk to you. So if you can find a good EQ pedal and like preferably parametric EQ, especially in the mid range, you can find the one that kind of pierces in the nicest way and then boosts it in the nicest way, and make sure that the Q is just as round or as sharp as you want it to be. That would make a big difference. You know, so between all those things, I think you get the idea. But
yeah, that's great. Thank you.
yeah,
I've got the Empress EQ, and it does the magic.
oh yeah, it does it good. Does it good. Like they're very neutral. Like they don't really mess with the sound itself. Right now I used to use the Empress, but since I got this new, you know, it's not new anymore, but like the Mofa guitar, the sound is so like sharp. It's so like it's really in your face in a good way. Like it's pretty, but it jumps out. I don't feel like I need such a harsh EQ, so I have one by Mulan, which is a Korean company that also makes those the guitars, the bass, and the Telecaster you see behind me. And they make pedals too, and they have this EQ that's basically like bass, treble, and then the mid range you have parametric EQ, so you can actually dial like which mid range you want to boost or cut. And I mean, but this one is actually more like an old school piece of gear where it adds like a nice character to the sound too. I love that pedal. I mean, for this guitar, it's perfect, and actually, it sounds great with the Howard Orbits too. So I bet you might like that one too.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
Cool. Thank you, Gilad.
Yeah, thank you.